My husband had one rule about our daughter's school, and it was that I wasn't allowed to be involved in anything that required a signature. I didn't understand it at first. He framed it as helpfulness. "You're already doing so much at home, babe. I'll handle the school paperwork. You don't need that stress." And I believed him, the way you believe someone who has never given you a reason not to. The way you believe someone you married at 28 because he was steady and warm and made you feel for the first time in your adult life like someone was actually paying attention to you. His name was Owen. We'd been together 4 years, married for 2. Our daughter Poppy was 6. She was his from a previous relationship. Her mother had walked out when Poppy was 18 months old and never looked back. I'd stepped into that role gradually, then completely. I loved that little girl the way you love something that chose you even when it didn't have to. Owen worked in commercial real estate, long hours, a lot of travel to client sites in the suburbs, always on his phone. I worked part-time as a dental hygienist 3 days a week, which meant I was home most afternoons when Poppy got off the bus. I helped with homework, I packed lunches, I bought her the purple sparkle sneakers she cried for at Target and then wore every single day for 4 months. What I didn't do, apparently, was sign anything at her school. The first time I noticed it, I didn't think much of it. I'd filled out a field trip permission slip for a trip to the nature center and left it on the kitchen counter. When I asked Owen about it the next morning, he said he'd already sent a different form in, that the school needed the signature of her legal guardian. "You're not on her emergency contact list yet," he said. "I keep meaning to get that sorted." I nodded. It made sense technically. I wasn't her biological parent. We hadn't gone through any formal step-parent adoption process. These things took time, and Owen was always talking about getting around to it. But then it happened again. A consent form for a hearing screening. He intercepted it before I even saw it. Then a questionnaire from the school counselor. Then a release form for a gifted program evaluation that Poppy's teacher had recommended her for. "She's not ready for that kind of pressure," Owen said about the gifted program, before I'd even had a chance to read what the evaluation involved. I started paying closer attention. It was a Tuesday in March when I finally asked the question I'd been turning over for weeks. Poppy had come home quieter than usual. When I asked her how her day was, she said, "Fine." When I asked what they'd done in class, she said, "Stuff." When I asked if she was feeling okay, she looked at me with this expression I hadn't seen on her before, careful, measureless, and said, "Daddy said not to talk about school things with you." I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, her backpack on the counter, the smell of the chicken I was defrosting, filling the room. I didn't say anything to Owen that night. I smiled through dinner, put Poppy to bed, listened to him, tell me about a closing that had gone sideways in Naperville. I said the right things, I laughed in the right places, and when he fell asleep, I lay in the dark and thought about all the forms I hadn't been allowed to sign. The following week, Owen had a 2-day site visit in Cincinnati. He left on a Wednesday morning, kissed me on the cheek, told me he'd be back Thursday night. I took Poppy to school on Wednesday myself. I walked her to her classroom instead of dropping her at the curb like we usually did. Her teacher, a woman in her early 40s with reading glasses, pushed up on her forehead, and a genuine warmth that you can't fake smiled when she saw me. "You must be Poppy's stepmom," she said. "I've been hoping to meet you." Something in her tone made me stay. We talked for a few minutes while the other kids settled in. She said Poppy was bright, curious, great with the other kids. Then she paused in a way that felt deliberate. "Can I ask, are you involved in her care plan?" I didn't know what that meant. I told her so. She looked at me for a moment. Then she asked if I could come back at 3:30 after dismissal. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before driving home. I couldn't have told you what I was feeling exactly. It wasn't fear yet. It was something more like the sensation you get when you're looking at a picture and something in the background is slightly wrong. A shadow that falls the wrong direction. A reflection that doesn't match. I came back at 3:30. Poppy's teacher had another woman with her. She introduced her as the school's special services coordinator. They sat across from me at a kidney-shaped table clearly designed for 6-year-olds, and I folded my knees up and tried to look like I wasn't already coming apart. The coordinator spoke carefully. She said that Poppy had been enrolled in a supplemental services program the previous fall, a program for children with identified developmental concerns. The school had been conducting assessments, speech, cognitive behavioral, monthly check-ins with a child psychologist who came in from an outside practice. None of that had been shared with me. The coordinator said that all the consent forms and communication had gone to Poppy's father. That was standard, she said, when only one parent or guardian was listed on the enrollment paperwork. She paused. We actually tried to reach you directly last November. We had a different phone number on file for you, and it went to voicemail. We sent a letter to the house. I never saw a letter. I asked what the developmental concerns were, what had triggered the referral. The coordinator and the teacher exchanged a look. It lasted less than a second, but I caught it. The coordinator said that the original referral had come from Poppy's previous school before she'd enrolled here, that there had been some notes in the file about potential issues with fine motor development and auditory processing. The outside psychologist had been assessing whether there was any neurological basis. Has Poppy seen any outside specialists? The teacher asked. Neurologists, for example. Has she had any advanced imaging done? The air in the room changed. I said I didn't know of any, that her pediatric checkups had always been handled by Owen, that I'd asked to come along and been told it was during my work hours, that he had it covered. The teacher set a folder on the table in front of me. Inside was a copy of Poppy's assessment records, the ones the school had. There was a note clipped to the front from the outside psychologist. It referenced a separate evaluation she had not conducted, one that had apparently been initiated through a private clinic. She'd noted it because some of Poppy's results seemed inconsistent with a child who had already undergone that level of testing. The name of the clinic was a pediatric neurology group in the northern suburbs. I recognized the area code of the phone number on the letterhead. It was the same exchange as the address Owen had given me for a client of his that I'd mailed a package to last spring. I thanked them. I collected a copy of everything they were allowed to give me. I picked up Poppy from the aftercare room, buckled her into her booster seat, and drove home. She chattered the whole way about a caterpillar her class had found at recess. I answered her. I asked the right questions. I kept both hands on the wheel. That night, after she was asleep, I went through Owen's filing cabinet. He kept it locked, but I'd seen him open it dozens of times. The key was on his keyring, and his spare keyring hung on a hook inside the pantry door. He'd never told me not to use it. He'd just never mentioned what was in the cabinet. The bottom drawer had a hanging file labelled PPP, medical. I pulled it out. There were the usual things, vaccination records, the summary from her 2-year well visit, her paediatrician's contact information, and then behind all of that, a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were documents from the pediatric neurology clinic, evaluation summaries, lab results. Something that looked like a referral letter addressed not to a doctor but to a research coordinator at a university hospital in Chicago. I read it 3 times before I understood what I was reading. The referral letter described Poppy as a potential participant in a longitudinal study of inherited neurological conditions. It referenced a family history, Owen's family history, of a degenerative condition that typically presented in adulthood. The study was tracking children of affected individuals to establish baseline neurological data. Data that would, according to the letter, be used to inform future treatment protocols. Future treatment protocols for Owen. There was a financial disclosure form at the back of the envelope. The participants in the study received compensation. The form was already signed. Owen's signature. In the space for the child's guardian consent, the line was blank. I sat on the floor of our bedroom for a long time. I thought about all the times I had been kept out, all the forms I hadn't signed, all the medical appointments I hadn't attended, the separate phone number the school had for me that I'd never been given, the letter I'd never received. I thought about the way Owen talked about Poppy's future, always in this general, vague way. We'll see how she develops. She's got a lot going on in that little head. I just want to make sure she gets the right support. I thought about the fact that I had loved her for 3 years and hadn't known about any of this. I took photos of every document in the envelope. Then I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. I called in sick the next morning. I drove to the office of a family law attorney whose name I'd gotten from a co-worker who'd been through a difficult divorce 2 years earlier. She had a cancellation at 10. I took it. I laid everything out. The school meeting, the documents, the research consent form, the signed compensation agreement. My attorney asked me several questions: whether Poppy's biological mother had ever terminated her parental rights, whether Owen and I had ever begun step-parent adoption proceedings, whether I was listed anywhere on Poppy's legal documentation. The answer to all three was no. She was honest with me. She said my legal standing in Poppy's life was limited, that as a step-parent without an adoption decree, I had no automatic custodial or decision-making rights. But she also said that what I'd found in that envelope raised serious child welfare concerns that went beyond my personal legal standing. That a parent enrolling a minor child in a medical research study without the co-guardian's knowledge, or, potentially, with falsified consent documentation, was something that the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services would take seriously, as would a family court judge, if it came to that. She told me not to confront Owen alone. I almost listened to her. He came home Thursday night the way he always did, wheeling his overnight bag through the door, loosening his tie, asking what was for dinner. I'd made pasta. I'd set the table. Poppy had made a drawing of a horse at school that day and taped it to his chair. We ate dinner. Owen told a story about a contractor in Cincinnati. Poppy told him about the caterpillar. I watched his hands while he talked, the way he gestured, the way he tore bread, the way he touched Poppy's hair when she leaned against him. I thought about that blank signature line. After Poppy was in bed, I told him I'd run into an issue with her school pickup paperwork and needed him to explain our enrollment setup to me. It was a specific, narrow question, not an accusation. I kept my voice easy. He started explaining about the legal guardian designation, how it was simpler to have just one point of contact, how he'd always meant to update it. I asked if he'd been in touch with a clinic in the northern suburbs recently. He stopped. The silence lasted maybe 4 seconds. I counted them. "Where did you hear that?" he said. "Not what clinic. Not, I don't know what you mean. Where did you hear that?" I told him I'd spoken with people at Poppy's school, that I knew about the assessments, that I knew about the research study. He was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, "It's not what you think." He said his father had been diagnosed with the condition 3 years earlier, before we'd even met, that it was hereditary and that he'd always known Poppy might be at risk, that when he'd found out about the study, it had felt like a way to get ahead of it, to have information, to protect her. By enrolling her in a research study without telling me, I said. "You weren't her legal parent," he said, not cruelly, matter-of-factly, like it resolved something. I thought about 3 years of lunches, 3 years of homework help and bedtime stories and purple sparkle sneakers. I thought about a little girl who had been told not to talk about school things, Meethy. "You excluded me deliberately," I said. "You made sure my name wasn't on anything, so that when you needed to make decisions about her that I might have questioned, I had no standing to question them." He didn't deny it. He said he'd done what he thought was best. He said the study was legitimate, conducted by a respected university program. He said no one had done anything to hurt Poppy. "That's not the point," I said. The next morning, while Owen was in the shower, I called my attorney. Then I called DCFS. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The research coordinator at the university hospital, when contacted by DCFS, confirmed that the consent form they had on file contained only one signature, where 2 were required under the clinic's own protocol, because Poppy's file listed a current step-parent in the household. Owen had omitted me on the form. The clinic had not caught it. The university suspended the study pending review. DCFS opened a formal investigation. Owen was required to appear before a family court judge within 30 days. My attorney petitioned for a formal custody evaluation in parallel, using my 3 years of documented caregiving involvement as the foundation. It wasn't a guaranteed outcome, she told me that plainly. But the judge, a woman in her late 50s who had clearly heard many versions of this story, asked Owen directly why his wife's name appeared nowhere in his daughter's educational or medical records. He said he hadn't gotten around to it. She did not look like she found that convincing. The final order came 6 weeks after that initial court date. Owen retained primary physical custody, but a co-guardianship arrangement was formalized, which meant that going forward I was required to be notified of and consent to any medical, educational, or legal decisions involving Poppy. The research study consent was voided. The clinic was required to update their consent verification process. Owen and I were in couples counseling for a while after that. It didn't hold. We separated 8 months later. The separation was quiet, the way things are quiet when all the loudness has already happened. What I want to say about Poppy is this. She's 7 now and she still draws horses. She got a reading award at school last month and held it up with both hands for the photo like she was lifting a trophy at the Olympics. Her auditory processing, after legitimate evaluation by a specialist I was present for, is well within normal range. She doesn't need the kinds of interventions Owen had been told to prepare for. She knows that both her dad and I love her. She knows that things changed between us, because children always know, even when you try to protect them from knowing. What she doesn't know yet, what I hope she won't need to understand for a very long time, is how close she came to being managed instead of loved. I used to think that being shut out of paperwork was a minor thing, an administrative frustration, something to bring up on a Sunday morning over coffee and get sorted eventually. I know better now. Exclusion is a method. The paperwork is the point. When someone makes sure your name isn't on anything, they're not being disorganized. They're making sure that when the moment comes, you have no ground to stand on. Poppy called me from her dad's house last week to tell me that the class caterpillar had finally made its cocoon. She was whispering, like it was a secret she was keeping for both of us. I told her that was the most important news I'd heard all day. It was.